Hey guys, welcome back to Honey in the Rock, episode 89. I'm Sophie, and this is Stone Dickson. Thanks for coming on.
Definitely.
So a couple weeks ago, a friend texted me and was like, "Come to our youth group. Stone Dickson is sharing his testimony tonight." And we went to middle school together. We went to different high schools.
Yeah.
But I was like, I remember from middle school, and I was like, okay, I'll hear his testimony. And so we showed up to their church, and it was one of the most incredible nights. It was so encouraging. We left and we were doing like cartwheels in the parking lot. So, and you get that like Holy Spirit high. We were just so excited. And that night I was like, will you come on my podcast? Because his story is just such an example of when we're saved, it's from darkness to light. And his story is such a good example of that. And just like your wisdom, it was really incredible just to hear you start talking. And you gave an example that stood out a lot to me. It was like when we go back to what's comfortable, even when it's not
the best.
Not the best. Yeah. Yes. And you use that example of the Israelites, right?
Mm-hmm.
They went back into slavery after they got out of it, and it's just like we go back to what was comfortable. And once you said that, I was like, that was a really good connection. And so it was really encouraging. So thank you for coming on and just being vulnerable in this way and sharing at your church and all that.
Yeah.
But tell us about yourself. Who are you?
My name's Stone Dickson. I finished high school in December this year, and I'll walk either next week or the week after. Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm working for a few different people. One of them is Legacy Homes, Branson Guest. Then after that, I'll go to Anderson University for either Christian Studies or business.
Yeah, that's perfect. I was going to go to Anderson.
Really?
But it didn't make sense, like, financially. That's a side note. Yeah. But I was going to go and do Christian Studies at Anderson. Yeah. I loved it there.
My mom's a professor there, so it makes a little bit more sense.
Oh, yes, that's perfect. I know my dad coaches at Furman,
really?
And so it just made sense to, like, go
well,
there.
Furman and Anderson have, like, tuition swap.
Yes, but it wasn't full tuition.
Oh.
Yeah. But anyways, that was a side note. But I loved Anderson, and it was a good school. Yeah. And then what church do you go to?
Well, really, I go to First Pres, but we are still members of Brookwood.
Okay, yeah. So I went to, that's where I heard him talk, was at First Pres. I know so many people who go to First Pres, but I also realize it's a big church.
Yeah.
So then it's like, you can't just like name drop people. Okay, well, you can dive into your testimony. You can start wherever.
I mean, we can just start from the get-go where I started. So I was born into a family of two people who weren't really following Christ, which led to their marriage kind of dwindling and fading away shortly after my birth. So I believe at the age of like 3 months old, they separated, and me and my mom moved back to the upstate of South Carolina with my grandparents. And that point, custody was they both still had custody of some sort. Right. And so I would go from one house to another, but at that point I didn't really remember it. So growing up with my grandparents in that house, it was a faith-based house, so you would go to church and this and that, but it was nothing more than that. And I went to a Christian school as a young age, so there was a lot of faith in my life from a young age, but there was nothing more than that. And then my dad had some problems, my mom had some problems, and those kind of led to more of a struggle in their relationship as they fought for custody of me. And then I saw some sides of both of my parents that was kind of interesting. My mother was always there and very stand-upish and very faith-driven, but some things in her past life kind of brought her away from that, with just questioning her faith as a whole.
Yeah.
And so a lot of struggle with my dad was just like the relationship as a whole, and the strain on the relationship between him and my mother sometimes was taken out on me as a young kid. And so there's a lot of abuse and mental and physical abuse that happened in that relationship, which kind of questioned my idea of what is love from a very young age, because as seeing something like that happen, you come to the realization of, oh, this is normal, or this is what's supposed to happen. Yeah. When in reality, it's not. And so that continued for a few years as custody continued to go back and forth. And at the age of 7, my mom remarried. And when she remarried a man who called himself a Christian. And so for me, we moved to Greenville from Inman, which is a small town near Spartanburg. Yeah. And so it was a very large culture shock. You go from a town of maybe 2,000 people, very small, knit together town, to a very large, booming, bustling metropolis, so to speak. Right. And so in that, it was just everything was different. New family, new friends, new school. And so it was a good time for me just to like expand my horizon and see that there's another world out there. And so that was good. And then we learned about the Bible some, and then we started going to church with him because he called himself a Christian and acted like a Christian at the beginning. Yeah. So we started Bible studies and started going to church, and it was really nice actually to have that faith-based family. Right. But shortly after that, that kind of dwindled away when his drinking began to rise. And so one drink would come to another, and then it would be another and another. And in that, their relationship began to strain and began to fall apart. And in that, 2 businesses failed, which ended up leading to my mom working 3 jobs, which led to more stress on her and their relationship.
Right.
And in that, I was kind of helpless, so to speak, because as a kid who's 13 to 15 at this time, you see your mom doing all these things, you see all these things happening to your mom, but you're helpless and not being able to help her
Yeah.
do anything. And so you feel a sort of like not
That guilt.
yeah, a sort of guilt of not being able to help her in any way, but you
Yeah.
see her going through these things. And so in that, once I began to drive at the age of 15, I kind of began to escape that reality by just getting away from the house and getting out of the house. And for a short period, that was nice. But when you start just searching for something to fill your life up when you've been so hurt for so long, you go to the wrong crowds, you get introduced into the wrong things.
Right.
And so in that, I began to drown my life with drugs and alcohol and just trying to bury all this hurt and all this pain that I had nowhere else to cast this pain.
Right.
And so seeing all these things happen in my life, God was always like an idea, but it was never like a relationship. And so I was like, well, God, if you're supposed to be loving, you're supposed to be Christian. I mean, you're supposed to be loving and caring, and you love everyone here and everyone there.
Right.
Sorry, that little chipmunk.
There's a chipmunk on the window. It was really distracting.
I was watching this running.
I was gonna say something. I was like, do I say there's a chipmunk walking right there?
Anyways, in that, so you see someone who calls himself a Christian, but it doesn't look like the Bible. And so you question, is Christianity real? Is Christianity a good thing? And then if God is real and God is loving, how does he let all these things happen
Right.
to your family and loved ones,
Yeah.
people that you care about? Because as a 15-year-old boy, you don't understand God's true love and how God works through things.
Right.
Because when you're in the middle of it, you can't see the next step.
Yeah.
And so in that, I went to just drowning myself in drugs and alcohol and filling my life with things that weren't good and weren't wholly in search of happiness, because
Right.
I thought that happiness was something that could fill my life. But happiness, as I've learned in my walk with Christ, is happiness is very circumstantial.
Right.
And so people chase this idea of happiness and look for happiness, 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 when in reality they need joy.
Yeah.
And you can't get that joy until you find God. And that joy
Right.
is eternal and it only comes from God.
Mm.
And so many people find themselves in the same place that I was, of looking for this and trying to fill that, people call it that Jesus-sized hole in their heart.
Yes.
With all these different things, whether it be sex, drugs, alcohol, or
Right.
maybe it even is just an eating, something that they fill their life with that they think
Right.
will cause joy when it can't. And so in that, I began to down spiral in my life and just like was so upset and so hurt by all the people who have hurt me and this God that was supposed to be there that wasn't. So I kind of, any time that God was brought up, I kind of pushed it away.
Right.
It was just like, this isn't for me because there is no God.
Right.
And so in this, it was a lot of hurt and a lot of pain. But
Yeah.
I told this to my girlfriend the other day because we were talking about this, and she goes, how do you, or something along the lines of, this is really hard. And I go, yeah, but I wouldn't change a single thing that happened, because everything that happened led me to where I am today.
Right.
And built my relationship with Christ stronger than
Right.
it's ever has been.
Yeah.
And so in January of 2023, so a little bit over 14, 15 months ago now,
Yeah.
I got a phone call or a text message from my mom that goes, they had gotten into a very bad argument that day. And she goes, do you want to leave? And I go, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that day we packed our bags and once again moved back with my grandparents.
Mm.
And at that point, I was still very upset and very hurt by what had happened and what was going on.
Yeah.
But going back to that faith-centered household kind of brought back a little bit more light into my life, and just to see how people interact when Christ is at the center of their lives.
Yeah.
And so once we moved back to Greenville, we got an apartment. My mom started going to church again.
Mm.
And so in that, she goes, Stone, do you want to go to church? And I go, sure, I'll go. Why not? And so I went one time. It was okay. It was nothing really extraordinary.
Right.
But I began to read the Bible, and it was the only Bible I had. I think it was given to me like at my 5K graduation or something like
Yes.
that. And so I found that Bible. I still have it today. But I found that Bible. I started reading it, and so I was like, okay, well, so I read a little bit more. My mind was still pretty closed, but I was like, well, maybe there's an opportunity. And so I remember the Sunday that church, my mom had asked me the day before, do you want to go to church? And I go, yeah, I'll go, whatever. Just kind of go in as like a support for her. Right. I knew that she had been through a lot. And I remember laying on my bed, and I get up and I go, God, I don't know what this is, but if you want me to do something, let me know. Mm. And it was a gift from my mother. I think it was like my 14th birthday or something. She gave me a necklace that my great-grandmother had worn her whole life. Yeah. And so I said, God, give me a sign if you want me to go. And as soon as those words entered my head, 2 drops of blood fell out of my nose and landed on that cross. Mm. And at that point, I was like, whoa. And being born into a faith-based family, you could say, you know that the blood and the cross had very important meanings. Right. I'm like, okay. let's see where this goes, so to speak. I was kind
Yeah.
of still a little weary, but I was like, okay. So we go to church, and that morning the pastor was actually sick.
Mm.
And so this one guy, gosh, I can't remember his name now. He's a great guy. He stepped in and delivered a sermon,
Right.
and the sermon was on salvation.
Mm.
And for me, just to hear that sermon and just know that there was a God that loved me and cared about me, and everything that I had messed up in my life and everything that had been hurt in my life or hung up could be healed by this man. One,
Right.
that God's love could do all that for me. And so in that, I was kind of like, okay. And then at the end, he was like, does anyone want to come up? And I was like, I don't want to come up. In my head,
Like, no,
I'm
no,
not
yeah.
going up in front of this church. I don't know who these people are, but I knew I had to.
Mm.
And so I did. And I remember the lady who met with me, and she goes, what can I help you with? And before I could even get words out of my mouth, I just started bawling.
Right.
Because it was almost like your home moment, like you know everything's going to be okay.
Right.
And just like the peace and the joy of knowing that everything is going to be okay, which is so amazing for me.
Right.
And after feeling that true joy of giving your life to God, I was on fire.
Right.
And so I mean, everything in my life had completely changed.
Mm.
I had this father who loved me,
Right.
and this amazing relationship that I could look at this book and just continue to build this relationship. But once you give your life to God, a lot of things have to change your life.
Yeah.
Especially for someone who was in such a different path.
Mm.
And so in that, you have to take the people that you used to hang out with and separate yourself from those people.
Right.
Because you can't associate with those people and associate with God at the same time. And so in that, there was a lot of loneliness, and I was upset at God because I go, God, I'm giving my life to you. I'm trying to follow you, but I don't have anyone around me to help me.
Yeah.
And so I prayed about that and prayed about that. But in that time, I came to the realization later as I was talking to a few different people. And in that time, God led me to be alone because I was too far ahead of the people who I used to be with, but too far behind the people in the next group. And so God gave me that time of loneliness and isolation to spend time with Him, my true Father, and learn how He loves me and how I'm so loved by Him and how just the amazing things that He did through the Bible can do in our lives if we just open our hands and say, you know, God, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I know that you do.
Right.
And so just building that relationship in that time that once I was so upset about, I'm now so grateful for. And so in that, I mean, a lot of things that are just so unexplainable have happened in my life.
Right.
And now looking back at it, after that time of isolation, I have an amazing group of people around me, a great Bible study, an amazing Christ-centered girlfriend who just continues to uplift me and help me in my relationship with God as well. And so it's just amazing to see how much God can work in your life. And now someone who my mom had recently, or in the past had started working as a professor at a Christian university, and I always told her, you know, Mom, I'm not going to that stupid, I call it the stupid little Christian college.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason for me to go there because, and all the circumstances I saw in my life, there was no reason to go there.
Right.
But now seeing that I have the ability to go to a Christian school for free and study in the Word and of the Word and with people who have the same mindset and same wants, it's just such a blessing in my life.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I love how you went. There's a couple parts of your story that I really love. You know, that idea of brokenness, from your home at the beginning of this abuse and drugs and drinking that hurt you, and then how you responded to that hurt was to follow in the footsteps. But then how you didn't have to stay that route, and then which leads me to the part where you just went, like you went as you were. You went to the altar as you were. You went to Jesus. Then it wasn't like you're like, okay, well, let me get myself cleaned up and then give my life to Jesus. You're like, no, I need to give my life to Jesus now. And so I really love that. It's like our past is fully forgiven when we give our lives to Jesus. And then, and how you said a lot the other night when you were sharing your testimony was that, like, you didn't understand how God could be good, or how are you loving, how are you all these things if my circumstances in life aren't good. And I don't know how much your circumstances have even changed now, but it's not like once we follow Jesus, our life's perfect.
Absolutely not.
Everything's perfect, and our family is perfect, and our friends are perfect, and all of these things are perfect. It's still really hard, but we have this foundation and this rock that we get to lean back on. And so I really just love how you went to Jesus as you were, as we're all broken. And you're like, you know, wash me white. And then just chasing after Him, and then finding contentment in Him, even when our circumstances aren't good. That we're not promised that it's going to be good.
Definitely. One of the things someone asked me recently after I became a Christian, they go, has like anything changed, anything like happened in your life? Like, has God helped you? Has anything like changed? And I go, not a lot of things have changed, but now I have someone to go through the struggles with me.
That's
and that's the thing in knowing that the struggles are still going to happen whether you're a Christian or whether you're not a Christian.
Yeah.
But having someone to go through those struggles with you is what changes that.
Right, right. And just the perspective switch of that void that we have, that, Jesus sized hole in our heart, like you said, like we have this void and we're going to fill it somehow.
Yeah.
And if we don't, open our eyes and, don't harden our hearts to Jesus, then Jesus is going to fill that hole and we're going to be complete and whole. But if we don't, we are going to chase it in other things, whether it's the things you're talking about, or even if it's just like gossip or being so busy all the time. Just like trying to fill that void that only Jesus can fill. And so it's just going to leave us emptier if we're chasing and chasing and chasing, because it's never going to be enough. There's something else that you said that I really like too. But just that, like, we can be redeemed in Jesus and restored and renewed. And then, this is what it was, is how like people didn't recognize you.
Yeah.
People were coming up after that Wednesday night, like talking to you, and they're like, somebody said the example of like this, you were friends with this guy, and then he was like, one day I saw you at school, and I was like, I don't know who that is. It's like,
yeah.
You have to, your life needs to reflect that change that you've made. If you decided to follow Jesus, then our lives should reflect that, which leads to people, people are either seeing Jesus through you as this light is shining in front of you, and people are just not recognizing you because the old is gone and the new has come.
Yeah, a lot of people there, and to come to that point, a lot of people there were like, I heard you were speaking and I had to come because I was someone before that people on the podcast may not see, but you saw at school, and people saw of my home life had changed who I was as a person. And seeing that, like, how amazing God can change someone in even 14 months if you just truly say, I'll give you everything and you do what you want with me.
Right.
Because a lot of people get into this mindset of, I'll give you this and I'll give you this, but you can't have this or you can't have that. And God won't fully work in our lives until we say, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I know you do.
Right.
And I'm going to trust you in that.
Yeah.
And so in that, a lot of times you just have to be open and just go, I don't know what my plans are for my life, but I know yours are.
Yeah.
And so I took that in the whole heart back in the beginning, and I was just like, I don't know what to do, but you do. And he flourished in my life. And like you said, my buddy Gabe, he goes, Stone, I don't know what it is about you, but something's different.
Right.
And so I was able to share the gospel with him, and 2 weeks later, he got saved.
Right. That's so cool. It's like we have to surrender our whole life to Jesus. We're not just giving our Sundays to Jesus or our Wednesday nights to Jesus. It's like, I'm giving you all of my life, every aspect of it. And then people are going to see the change in your life when you follow Jesus, like they did in yours. And it really was really cool because I remember you from middle school. And now that you share the story, it's like, oh, I wish I would have known, what I've given. It makes me be like, I need to be more aware and more gracious. Because nobody knows what's going through. No. And no one knew what I was going through. No one knows what you're going through. No one knows what. So we just need to be gracious to each other. But this doesn't really mean much because I was intimidated by everybody in middle school. I was afraid of everything. But I was intimidated by you in middle school. You're the cool guy. And I was like, oh, like he probably thinks I'm just like some little blonde girl. But it was then to hear you, they were like, Stone's giving us testimony. It was like, I'll be there, like drop everything going, because to know the old you and then to see the new you, it's like renewed in Jesus. And then it's like how you just give God the glory. It's like, it's not what we can do. It's not, we can't work for our salvation. We can't get everything perfect. It's like, no, we just have to surrender to Jesus. And like you said, just surrender all of it, all of our life. And then last thing I'll say, is how you said, like, when they asked, what's different about you? Don't shy away from the fact. It's like, no, Jesus. It's easy in school or work or wherever you are to be like, hide our faith almost.
Yeah, definitely.
And instead, when someone's like, something's different about you, or there's a light about you, it's like, that's Jesus. Can I tell you about him? And not be ashamed of that, because we're in the place we're in for a reason. And we have the stories we have for a reason. And I'm going to be able to connect with people because of my story for certain reasons. And you're going to be able to connect with different people with your stories for different reasons. And it's all going to come back for the glory of God.
I feel like a lot of times people are so afraid to share their faith based on what other people will say and other people will do.
Right.
But a lot of times, if you take the step, like I talked about in my testimony, in John 5, when he had to take the step of faith and decide, you know what, I'll give this to you, God. And God took the mat, something that bound him for 38 years, and transformed it into something amazing. And so a lot of times we're scared to take that first step, but that first step is what can change so many people's lives. Right.
And your testimony is like that visual of that first step of you stepping out of the pew into the front. Like, that's a good visual of like literally that first step. And maybe you don't have that exact remember that moment where you stepped out in faith, but to make that step, not be afraid, and don't limit God with different parts of you, or be like, God can't use me because of this or that.
And a lot of times in my past and learning through this is that like a lot of people and me myself have embarrassment of someone who wasn't a Christian, wasn't following God, and have the embarrassment of how can God love somebody like me who was a sinner, but God can love anyone,
right?
No matter where you've been or what you've done.
Yeah. I didn't tell you I was gonna ask this, so if you can't answer it, it's okay. But like, what do you do with shame? Like, did you ever deal with that shame or embarrassment of like, this was me and I, want to hide that? Or
shame was a very big part of my growing with God, because for a lot of times I was so embarrassed and so hurt by what I had done in my life and what had been done to me in my life that I hid and I tried to drown it out, so to speak.
Right.
And my girlfriend, Corey, really helped me with this a lot, because I remember early in our relationship, I had really struggled with being upfront with some of the things that had happened in my life, just because of how embarrassing they were to me. And we were reading John 5 together, and it talks about how God can take your past and turn it into something amazing.
Right.
And so she's really helped me to come closer to God and closer in our relationship by knowing that I'm loved by Him and by her no matter what, because that's what God does.
Right. And that like forgiveness, I think we have a skewed vision almost of forgiveness, because here on earth, like example, let's say like I hurt you. And it's like, oh, I forgive you, but you're going to keep that in the back of your mind, and we're going to call it guarding our heart. But it's like, oh, well, I'm going to be aware of you, and I'm going to keep my distance from you. And if you ever do something again, then 3 strikes you're out. And it's not true forgiveness. But then forgiveness with Jesus is like, He doesn't remember that. We lay it down at the cross and we surrender it. We repent and we ask for forgiveness, and Jesus forgives it and then doesn't hold it against us. It's not like, Sophie, I told you last week not to do this again. Obviously, like our sin hurts God. We sin against God. But forgiveness in Jesus is like full forgiveness. And so then there should be no shame in that, because He doesn't even remember it.
Exactly.
And but I think it's hard because in the world, like if somebody hurts me, I'm gonna forgive you. I need to work on this. I'm gonna forgive you, but I'm gonna remember. And I'm gonna make sure everyone else stays careful when they're around you.
And you can see this so many times, like time and time again in the Bible, the people that God chooses to use have such a big impact on the kingdom of God. Like Paul, Apostle Paul, he murdered and killed hundreds of Christians, and then He used him to be one of the biggest parts of God's glory. I mean, Moses murdered someone, and Moses had a speech impediment. But He uses those things and turns them for good. You just have to trust.
Like God can use broken people, and He's going to equip us to do what He calls us to do.
Exactly.
And that takes the pressure off of us, because we're all broken people. We all struggle with different sins. We all have different past. But when we come and lay our lives down at the cross, it's like we're broken, and we're going to surrender it and give Him our full lives, our full hearts, every aspect to Him. Well, this was so good.
Definitely.
Do you have anything else?
Not really, no.
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming and sharing your story. I know this is going to be encouraging. It was so encouraging for me. So I know it's going to encourage those listening, whether, they either need to be gracious to people, or they need to be like, wait, I can come to Jesus. It doesn't matter what your past looks like. Just go to Jesus and find freedom in Him. Just surrender your life.
Amazing.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for listening. And I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.